Pardon my French, but to borrow a rather well-worn phrase, there are lies, there are damned lies, and there are statistics. That's because stats, in their best form, help us account for our biases and get to reality as it actually is. But at the same time, because they're such a powerful tool, much like guns, they can be manipulated in ways that are very destructive. The stat that firearms are now the leading cause of death for children in replacing cars for the top spot has been cited by the president, the vice president, most media enterprises, including the New York Times, and here by CBS. But you're going to find out that is just a manipulation tactic. They're lying to you using statistics, and we're going to prove that here. Let's jump right in.
And turning now to a new report that says firearm deaths surpassed motor vehicles for the first time ever.
In 2020, guns were the leading cause of death for children in the United States. According to the CDC, more than 5 of every 100,000 kids aged 0 to 19 were killed by a gun.
I only exist on this channel to help you respond with wisdom and virtue to the ideas of our age. And a part of that is helping you form a really healthy BS meter, being able to realize and recognize when somebody is lying to you or likely trying to manipulate you. When you hear somebody compare two different statistics without giving you the actual data, they're almost certainly trying to make an implication that isn't true. Here you see they're comparing motor vehicles to firearm deaths. And when they say that firearm deaths now surpass motor vehicle deaths, the implication they're hoping that you come away with is the idea that your chances of your child being shot to death have radically increased over the last couple decades. When the actual implication of the data is, just looking at the report itself, is that your chances of your child dying in a car accident have radically decreased over the last 20 years. You can clearly see here they've been cut in nearly half, and your chances of your child being shot to death have actually only increased by about 20%. Now that stat itself is actually untrue and another manipulation of the data. But for right now, I simply want you to recognize that they are ignoring the radical, world-changing good news that doesn't win clicks, which is that fatal car accidents for children have been cut in half. That's wonderful news. Take the W, celebrate, be excited about that. Now let's go ahead and let's see what's actually changed about this firearm death number.
100,000 kids aged 0 to 19 were killed by a gun. Data shows that number increased sharply in 2019, and early data from 2021 indicates the number is continuing to rise.
Axios healthcare reporter Caitlin Owens joins us now with more on this report. And Caitlin, thank you very much for being with us. Can we break down these numbers further? What exactly do these figures show?
So what we're looking at, the figures you just showed on the screen were rate, but the total number of children who were killed by guns in 2020 was around 4,300. And the way that breaks down, about 2/3 of those deaths were homicides, about 30% were suicides, and then a handful were either unintentional or undetermined intent. So, that's what we're looking at. I think in the context of today's and this week's discussion.
Just a quick point there on each of these three numbers. First off, when you look at that unintentional number, you're talking about kids who, get into guns and accidentally kill themselves. This is a staggeringly low number when you think about all the other forms of accidents. Kids are far more likely to die of drowning. They're still far more likely to die in car accidents, even though that number has been cut in half. Just simply owning a gun does not put your child at an incredible risk of accidental death. Whenever it comes to suicides, you really should not include that in the firearm deaths because those can be achieved by other means and frequently are. So even if a child does not have access to a firearm, he still has the ability to complete that act. Now let's get to that first category. The clear implication of the story in every single time that it's cited is that your child and all children throughout the entirety of America have radically increased in their risk of being shot to death. But that simply isn't true. First off, why are they including 19-year-olds? Why are they including 18-year-olds? It actually turns out that 80% of all of these children being murdered are between the ages of 17 and 19. That's because there are certain neighborhoods in certain cities in our nation that are statistical outliers when it comes to murder rates, and that's almost all driven because of gang violence. The New York Times ran a very similar article saying gun violence recently surpassed car accidents as the leading cause of death for American children. The implication is clear if you read through their subheading. It talks about how car accidents replaced disease as the number one killer of kids all the way through the 80s. Kids were still 3 times more likely to die in car accidents than be killed by a firearm. And then the last line here, we're now living in the era of the gun. The idea there being that guns replaced the car in terms of danger. And if you go read the article, it leaves out entirely the fact that there was a near miraculous decrease in the amount of fatal car accidents for kids, meaning that even a moderate increase in gun homicides would cause them to switch places in terms of their ranking. That said, in that same article, they do show this specific graph. If you notice carefully, for every single race, the chances of being shot to death have not increased substantially or statistically, except for specifically one. But even saying that could be very misleading. If you notice, in the year 2015, we start to see see an increase in black gun homicide for children ages 1 through 18. And keep in mind that almost all of that is for 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds. And then we see a radical increase from the year about 2017 till 2020. Now you may see that graph and think, oh my goodness, black teens are at such a high risk of being shot. And that simply isn't true. Again, they're including outliers into the general data in order to scare you. The reality is there are certain neighborhoods, like in the south side of Chicago, that have a murder rate that are 26 times higher than the national average. So here's all the good news that you actually need to know and the small bit of bad news that we need to know so we can form correct policy prescriptions. Number 1, your kid has never been safer from disease. Number 2, your kid has never been safer on the inside of a car. Number 3, if your kid does not live in a hyper-violent neighborhood consumed with gang violence and drug violence, then his chances of being shot to death have statistically not really changed. And number 4, what do we do about these horrendous spikes in crime in these areas? We have to love our neighbors as ourselves, no matter what their skin color. We have to love our neighbors as ourselves, no matter what their zip code is. So the fact that we see an unbelievable increase in these certain neighborhoods, we can't simply write them off even though they're outliers. We have to do something about them. But the thing that we shouldn't do is incorporate their data into the general data set and assume that the statistical chance of being shot to death has increased for anybody aside from these specific young men. We have to actually care for these young men who are likely to be shot. And that means we have to craft policy that will help them, not some sort of vague policy about decreasing guns in America because everybody's more at risk of it. No. That's all narrative. That's all lies. That's all tyranny. They are intentionally manipulating the data to scare you into giving up the tools that are most effective in defending yourself against multiple assailants and tyrannical governments. Now, how can we actually help these young black men who are being slaughtered in these areas? Number 1, we have to pass actual common sense gun reform. Now, what does that mean? We all know that the gangs are not going to be giving up their guns anytime soon. So by making it more difficult for law-abiding citizens to purchase guns in those areas, you're effectively disarming good guys and arming bad guys. So make it much easier for law-abiding citizens to acquire concealed handgun licenses. John Lott has shown definitively that when concealed handgun licenses go up, violent crime goes down, and that is disproportionately beneficial to black neighborhoods. Number 2, we have to give them something to do other than the drug game or joining a gang or something like that. Usually people go to those things because there's no other alternatives. There's no other, their schools are trash, or there's no economic opportunities for them other than crime. So let's go through a host of different policies. Number 1, one way to increase the quality of schools is to make school choice more available. So whether that's vouchers, charter schools, there's a host of different opportunities, but we have to increase the quality of schools in the area. And that isn't simply done by spending. Competition always works better than spending. Number 2, we have to enforce theft and petty crime, petty larceny. The fact of the matter is that not only small businesses, but even big businesses like Walmart and CVS and Walgreens can't turn a profit whenever people can walk straight into these locations, steal, and walk out with absolute impunity. We also have to decrease regulation and allow small businesses to crop up. Not only does that encourage small businesses, but it actually provides the opportunity for these young men to be employed, which is why, even though I despise the character of Donald Trump, so do the vast majority of conservatives, by the way, we all made too little of the fact that his policies led to and this is one of the most important statistics you will ever hear, it led to the lowest rate of black unemployment ever recorded. If I'm correct, this would result in more employment, better education, and more good guys carrying gun, which all would have the net effect of decreasing this insane rate at which young black men are murdered in these terrible neighborhoods. That's it for today. Hopefully I've convinced you. If I haven't, that's okay. Just go to the comment section and tell me all the specific things you hate about me and specifically my appearance, because that is by far the best way to engage with an intellectual argument. If you're the kind of person who has not joined my Patreon yet, you're probably also the kind of person who trusts the New York Times. So join my Patreon and like, share, subscribe, and until next time, trust in God and keep your powder dry.